Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Speak English Fluently, the channel where we guide you on your journey to mastering English through engaging stories and lessons. Before we get started with today's thrilling tale, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. This way, you won't miss any of our new content designed to help you improve your English skills in a fun and exciting way. Today, I want to take you on a journey into the world of mystery and suspense. It's a story of me, a day when I stumbled into an adventure that tested my wits and courage like never before. Let's begin. Once upon a day, while walking through the bustling streets of my hometown, I found myself drawn to a narrow, cobblestone alleyway I had never noticed before. The alley was dark and quiet, a stark contrast to the busy streets I had just left behind. Something about it piqued my curiosity, and I decided to follow it, letting my feet lead me wherever they wanted to go. The alley twisted and turned, and soon I found myself standing in front of an old, forgotten shop. The sign above the door was faded, but I could just make out the words, Marlowe's Curiosities. Intrigued, I pushed open the heavy wooden door, a small bell tinkling overhead as I stepped inside. The shop was dimly lit, with shelves overflowing with strange and fascinating objects, antique clocks, dusty old books, and peculiar trinkets that seemed to have stories of their own. As I wandered through the aisles, I noticed a small, locked cabinet in the corner of the room. It was covered in dust, as if it hadn't been opened in years. But what caught my attention was the small brass plaque on the door that read, "The Case Files of Detective Marlowe." My heart skipped a beat. Detective Marlowe was a legend in our town, known for solving the most baffling mysteries, but he had vanished years ago without a trace. I had heard stories about his brilliance and his uncanny ability to see what others could not. And now, standing before me, were his case files, untouched and forgotten. I looked around, but there was no one in sight. The shopkeeper must have been in the back room. I felt a strange urge to open the cabinet, as if something inside was calling out to me. I hesitated for a moment, then decided to give in to my curiosity. I carefully picked the lock, something I had learned from a friend during my younger, more mischievous days, and the door creaked open. Inside the cabinet were several old, leather-bound notebooks. Each was labeled with a different case name, written in Detective Marlowe's neat handwriting. I picked up the one that read The Case of the Vanishing Jewel, and as I opened it, a small, yellowed photograph fell out. It was a picture of a beautiful diamond necklace, but what caught my attention was the note scrawled on the back, "The key to the mystery lies in the shadows." I sat down at a small wooden table in the corner of the shop and began to read. The notebook detailed a case that had baffled the town for years, the sudden disappearance of a priceless jewel from the estate of Lady Blackwood. The case had gone cold, with no leads, no suspects, and no trace of the jewel. But as I read through Marlowe's notes, I began to see connections that others had missed. The clues were there, hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone to piece them together. My mind raced as I followed Marlowe's trail, each clue leading me deeper into the mystery. I could feel the tension building, the excitement of the chase. Marlowe had been close to solving the case before he vanished, and now it seemed that the answer was within reach. The shop's clock chimed, snapping me out of my thoughts. I realized I had been sitting there for hours, lost in the detective's world. But something told me that the case wasn't just a story, it was real, and the answer was still out there, waiting to be discovered. Determined to solve the mystery, I slipped the notebook into my bag and quietly left the shop. As I stepped back into the alley, I knew my life was about to change. I was no detective, but the thrill of the hunt had ignited something within me. I was ready to take on the challenge that Detective Marlowe had left behind. The first step was to visit Lady Blackwood's estate, a grand old mansion on the outskirts of town. I had heard of the place but had never been there. It was said to be full of secrets, with a history as rich and mysterious as the family that lived there. I knew I had to go, and soon, before any remaining clues faded away like the morning mist. The next morning, I set off for the estate, my mind buzzing with questions. What had happened to the jewel? Who could have taken it, and why? And perhaps most puzzling of all, why had Detective Marlowe vanished just as he was about to solve the case? As I approached the mansion, I felt a chill run down my spine. The towering gates creaked as I pushed them open, revealing a long, winding driveway lined with ancient oak trees. The mansion loomed in the distance, its windows dark and foreboding, like eyes watching my every move. I took a deep breath and walked up to the massive front door, knocking firmly. After a few moments, the door creaked open, and I was greeted by the stern face of Lady Blackwood's butler, an older man with silver hair and piercing blue eyes. "May I help you?" he asked in a voice that was polite, yet carried a hint of suspicion. "I'm here to speak with Lady Blackwood," I replied, trying to sound confident. "It's about the missing jewel." The butler's eyes narrowed slightly, but he stepped aside, allowing me to enter. "Wait here," he said, before disappearing down a long, dimly lit hallway. I stood in the grand foyer, taking in the sight of the lavish decor. The walls were lined with portraits of stern-looking ancestors, their eyes seeming to follow me as I waited. A grand chandelier hung from the ceiling, casting a soft glow over the room. After what felt like an eternity, the butler returned. "Lady Blackwood will see you now," he said, leading me down the hallway and into a large drawing room. Lady Blackwood was seated by the fireplace, a regal figure with an air of authority. She was dressed in black, her silver hair pulled back into an elegant bun. Her piercing green eyes studied me as I entered the room. "You wish to discuss the missing jewel?" she said, her voice calm but with an underlying tension. "Yes, Lady Blackwood," I replied. "I believe there may be more to this case than meets the eye." She raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Go on." I took a deep breath and began to explain my discovery of Detective Marlowe's case files and the connections I had uncovered. As I spoke, I could see her expression change from skepticism to interest. "It seems you may have a keen eye," she said after I finished. "Very well, I will allow you to investigate further. But be warned, this estate holds many secrets, and not all of them are meant to be uncovered." With her permission granted, I knew that my journey had only just begun. The answers I sought were somewhere within the walls of this grand mansion, hidden among its many shadows. I began my investigation in the grand library, a vast room filled with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. The air was thick with the scent of old leather and paper, and the only sound was the crackling of the fire in the hearth. I started by examining the books, looking for any that seemed out of place or particularly relevant to the case. As I scanned the shelves, a title caught my eye, "The Shadows of the Past." It was a large, leather-bound volume with a worn cover, as if it had been read many times. I pulled it from the shelf and opened it, revealing a series of old photographs and handwritten notes tucked between the pages. The photographs were of the Blackwood family, spanning several generations, and the notes were written in a neat, precise hand. Detective Marlowe's, I assumed. One photograph, in particular, caught my attention. It was of a young woman wearing a diamond necklace, the very necklace that had gone missing. The note attached to it read, Lady Amelia Blackwood, 1912. The last known owner of the Blackwood diamond. As I examined the photograph more closely, I noticed something odd. The necklace seemed to glow faintly in the photograph, as if it had a life of its own. I looked around the library, half expecting to see the necklace materialize in front of me, but of course, nothing happened. I turned to the next page of the book, and my heart skipped a beat. There, scrawled in Marlowe's handwriting, was a cryptic message, the shadows hold the truth. Follow them, and you will find what you seek. The shadows. The key to the mystery lies in the shadows. Marlowe's note had said as much, but what did it mean? I glanced around the room, my eyes lingering on the dark corners where the firelight didn't reach. The shadows danced and flickered, as if they were alive, hiding secrets that only the brave dared to uncover. I decided to take Marlowe's advice and follow the shadows. I began by examining the room itself, looking for any hidden passages or secret doors that might be concealed by the play of light and dark. I moved the furniture, ran my hands along the walls, and even lifted the carpets, but found nothing. Frustrated but undeterred, I decided to try a different approach. I sat down in a chair by the fire, closed my eyes, and let my mind wander. I thought about the shadows, about how they could hide things from sight, and about how Marlowe had been so close to solving the case. I pictured the room in my mind, imagining the shadows shifting and revealing their secrets. And then, in the quiet of the room, I heard it, a faint whisper, so soft I almost missed it. I opened my eyes and looked around, but there was no one else in the room. The whisper came again, this time clearer, and I realized it was coming from the shadows themselves. I stood up and walked towards the darkest corner of the room, where the shadows were deepest. The whisper grew louder, urging me to come closer. I reached out my hand, and to my astonishment, it passed right through the wall. I gasped and pulled my hand back, my heart racing. There was something hidden behind the wall, something that could only be accessed through the shadows. With trembling hands, I pressed against the wall, and to my amazement, it swung open like a door. Behind it was a narrow, dark passageway that seemed to lead deep into the heart of the mansion. The whisper was louder now, almost like a voice, urging me to enter. I hesitated for a moment, then stepped into the passageway, the door closing silently behind me. The air was cool and damp, and the only light came from the faint glow of the walls, which seemed to pulse with a life of their own. The passageway twisted and turned, and I had to be careful not to lose my footing on the uneven stone floor. As I walked, the whisper grew louder, and I could make out words now, though they were still faint and difficult to understand. It was as if the walls themselves were speaking to me, telling me the secrets they had kept hidden for so long. Finally, the passageway opened up into a small, circular chamber. In the center of the chamber was a pedestal, and on the pedestal was a small, ornate box. The box was made of gold, with intricate carvings of vines and flowers, and it seemed to glow with an inner light. I approached the box, my heart pounding in my chest. This was it. This was what Marlowe had been searching for. The answer to the mystery was inside that box, I was sure of it. With a deep breath, I reached out and lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was the Blackwood diamond. It was even more beautiful than I had imagined, a brilliant blue diamond that sparkled in the dim light. But there was something else in the box as well, a small, folded piece of paper. I took out the paper and unfolded it. The message written on it was simple, but it sent a chill down my spine. The shadows never lie. I stared at the diamond, my mind racing. The shadows had led me here, to the heart of the mystery. But what did the message mean? Why had the diamond been hidden away like this, and what had Marlowe discovered that had caused him to vanish? I took the diamond and the note and made my way back through the passageway, my thoughts swirling with questions. As I stepped back into the library, the door behind me closed with a soft click, and the shadows returned to their normal, silent selves. Lady Blackwood was waiting for me in the drawing room, her expression unreadable. I handed her the diamond and the note, and watched as she read the message. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of fear in her eyes, but it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice steady. "You have done a great service to my family." I nodded, unsure of what to say. The mystery had been solved, but the answers I had found only seemed to raise more questions. What had the shadows been trying to tell me? And why had Marlowe disappeared? As I left the mansion, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the driveway. I couldn't shake the feeling that the mystery wasn't truly over, that there was more to be uncovered. The days that followed were strange, filled with an unsettling tension I couldn't quite explain. I found myself thinking constantly about the shadows, about the note, and about the secrets that still seemed to cling to the walls of Blackwood Manor. It was as if a part of the mystery had followed me home, refusing to let go. One night, unable to sleep, I decided to revisit Marlowe's notebooks. I had kept them with me, tucked away in a drawer, but now I felt compelled to go through them again, searching for something I might have missed. I opened the notebook that detailed the vanishing jewel case and started to read, letting my eyes trace the familiar lines of Marlowe's handwriting. And then, something strange happened. As I read, the words on the page began to blur and shift, as if the ink was alive, dancing across the paper. I blinked and rubbed my eyes, convinced I was just tired, but when I looked again, the words had changed. What had been a simple account of the investigation now read like a warning. Asterisk, beware the shadows, for they see all and know all. They are the keepers of secrets and the guardians of truth. But be warned, for those who delve too deeply may find themselves lost in the darkness, never to return. Asterisk. My heart pounded as I stared at the words, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Was this some kind of trick, or was there something more at play? The words seemed to pulse with a strange energy, and I could almost feel the weight of the shadows pressing in around me, as if they were alive and watching. Suddenly, the room grew cold, and I felt a presence behind me. I turned quickly, but there was nothing there, only the darkness of the night. The shadows seemed to stretch and reach for me, their inky tendrils curling along the walls. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that the shadows were more than just a metaphor. They were real, and they were alive. I had to find out what was happening, to uncover the truth before it was too late. I couldn't shake the feeling that Marlowe had been onto something far greater than a simple jewel theft, something that had cost him his life. And now, I was caught in the same web, pulled deeper into the mystery with each passing day. Determined, I decided to return to Blackwood Manor, this time in the dead of night, when the shadows were at their strongest. I knew it was a risk, but I had no other choice. The answers I sought were hidden within those walls, and I had to find them before the darkness consumed me. I arrived at the manor just as the clock struck midnight. The air was thick with fog, and the moon cast an eerie glow over the estate. The shadows seemed to ripple and shift as I approached the gates, almost as if they were alive, watching my every move. I took a deep breath and pushed open the gates, stepping onto the gravel driveway. The mansion loomed before me, its windows dark and foreboding. I could feel the weight of the shadows pressing in around me, but I forced myself to keep going. I had come this far, and I wasn't about to turn back now. As I reached the front door, I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering over the doorknob. The shadows seemed to pulse with anticipation, and I could feel the presence of something watching me from the darkness. But I pushed the fear aside and opened the door, stepping inside. The mansion was silent, the only sound the creaking of the floorboards beneath my feet. The shadows seemed to move of their own accord, swirling around me as I made my way down the hallway towards the library. I knew that whatever answers I sought would be found there, hidden within the depths of the shadows. When I reached the library, I paused, taking a deep breath before stepping inside. The room was dark, the fire long extinguished, and the shadows seemed to pool in the corners, their inky blackness swallowing the light. I could feel their presence, watching, waiting, as I made my way to the center of the room. And then I saw it. A figure standing in the darkness, shrouded in shadow. It was tall and thin, its features obscured by the darkness, but I could feel its eyes on me, burning with an intensity that made my skin crawl. The shadows seemed to swirl around it, drawn to it like moths to a flame. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. The figure didn't respond, but I could feel its presence pressing in on me, the weight of the shadows growing heavier with each passing moment. Suddenly, the figure moved, stepping closer, and I felt a wave of cold wash over me. I stumbled back, my heart racing as the figure reached out a hand, its fingers long and thin, like the branches of a dead tree. The shadows seemed to cling to its skin, curling and twisting as it reached for me. I tried to move, to run, but my feet were rooted to the spot, held in place by the darkness. The figure's hand was almost upon me, its cold touch inches from my skin, when suddenly, a voice rang out from the shadows. "Stop!" The figure froze, its hand hovering in the air, and the shadows seemed to shudder and pull back. I turned to see who had spoken, and there, standing in the doorway, was Lady Blackwood. Her eyes were wide, her face pale as she stared at the figure in the darkness. "You don't belong here," she said, her voice trembling. The figure slowly turned to face her, its features still obscured by the shadows, but I could feel the tension in the air, the weight of something ancient and powerful. "You must leave," she continued, stepping forward, her hands trembling as she held out the Blackwood diamond. "Take this, and go." The figure hesitated for a moment, then slowly reached out and took the diamond. The shadows seemed to ripple and shift as it did, pulling back from the figure and receding into the darkness. The figure stood there for a moment, the diamond in its hand, before slowly fading away, dissolving into the shadows until there was nothing left but darkness. Lady Blackwood collapsed to the floor, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she stared at the spot where the figure had stood. I rushed to her side, helping her to her feet as she trembled, her eyes wide with fear. "What was that?" I asked, my voice shaking. The shadows, she whispered, her voice barely audible. They are the guardians of this place, the keepers of the secrets that have been buried here for centuries. They protect the family, but they are not to be trifled with. I looked around the room, the shadows still swirling in the corners, and felt a chill run down my spine. The mystery of Blackwood Manor was far from over, and I knew that there were still secrets buried here, secrets that the shadows would protect at any cost. Come, Lady Blackwood said, her voice stronger now. There is much you need to know. She led me through the mansion, the shadows following us as we went, until we reached a small, hidden room at the back of the house. The room was filled with old books and papers, the walls lined with portraits of the Blackwood family. This is the heart of the manor, she said, her voice filled with reverence. The place where the family's secrets are kept. I looked around the room, the weight of the shadows heavy on my shoulders, and felt a sense of foreboding. Whatever secrets were kept here, they were not meant to be uncovered. Lady Blackwood handed me a small, leather-bound book, its pages yellowed with age. This will explain everything, she said, her voice solemn. But be warned, the shadows will not take kindly to those who pry too deeply. I took the book, my hands trembling as I opened it. The pages were filled with old, handwritten notes, detailing the history of the Blackwood family and the secrets they had kept hidden for centuries. As I read, the shadows seemed to close in around me, their presence growing stronger with each passing moment. The secrets of the Blackwood family were dark and twisted, filled with betrayal, murder, and the supernatural forces that had been summoned to protect them. The shadows were not just guardians, they were the spirits of those who had been wronged, bound to the manor by the dark magic that had been used to summon them. They were the keepers of the family's darkest secrets, and they would do anything to protect them. As I closed the book, the shadows seemed to press in on me, their presence suffocating. I could feel their anger, their desire to protect the secrets they had been tasked with guarding. I knew that I had to leave, to get out of the manor before the shadows consumed me. Lady Blackwood must have sensed my fear, for she gently took the book from my hands and placed it back on the shelf. You must leave now, she said, her voice filled with urgency. The shadows will not allow you to stay. I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest as I turned to leave. As I walked down the hallway, the shadows seemed to reach for me, their inky tendrils curling around my legs, pulling me back. But I forced myself to keep moving, to push through the darkness until I finally reached the front door. As I stepped outside, the air felt cool and crisp against my skin, the shadows retreating into the darkness of the manor. I turned back to look at the mansion, its windows dark and foreboding, and felt a shiver run down my spine. The mystery of Blackwood Manor had been solved, but at what cost? The secrets of the Blackwood family were still buried deep within the walls of the manor, protected by the shadows that would stop at nothing to keep them hidden. As I walked away from the manor, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had only just scratched the surface of the darkness that lay within. The shadows were still watching, still waiting, and I knew that one day, I would have to return to uncover the truth. But for now, the shadows would remain, guarding the secrets of Blackwood Manor, waiting for the next fool who dared to pry too deeply into the darkness. As I walked away from Blackwood Manor, the cold night air seemed to cling to me, a reminder of the shadows I had left behind. The town was quiet, the streets deserted, but I could still feel the presence of the manor looming behind me, its dark secrets weighing heavily on my mind. I returned home, but sleep eluded me. My thoughts kept drifting back to the shadows, to Lady Blackwood, and to the cryptic warnings I had uncovered. The book she had given me was still fresh in my memory, its pages filled with the twisted history of the Blackwood family. I knew I couldn't just forget what I had learned, the shadows wouldn't let me. The next morning, I woke with a renewed sense of purpose. I had to understand what I had encountered, to dig deeper into the mystery that still lingered in the corners of my mind. The shadows might be dangerous, but I couldn't ignore them. Something was drawing me back to Blackwood Manor, a force I couldn't resist. I decided to visit the town's library, hoping to find more information about the Blackwood family and the history of the manor. The library was a small, dusty building, tucked away on a quiet street. The librarian, Mrs. Whitaker, was an elderly woman with a kind smile and a love for old books. "Good morning," I said as I entered the library. Mrs. Whitaker looked up from her desk and smiled. "Good morning, dear. How can I help you today?" she asked. "I'm looking for any records or information you might have on the Blackwood family," I replied, trying to sound casual. Mrs. Whitaker's smile faltered slightly, and she gave me a curious look. "The Blackwood family, you say? That's quite an old and storied family. What brings you to inquire about them?" "I've been doing some research on the history of the town, and I came across their name. I'm particularly interested in the history of Blackwood Manor," I explained. Mrs. Whitaker nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. "Well, the Blackwoods have been in this town for generations. The manor itself is over 200 years old, and it's said to be full of secrets. Not many people ask about them these days. The family has kept to themselves for a long time. Do you have any records or books that might help me learn more about them?" I asked. Mrs. Whitaker stood up and motioned for me to follow her. "I believe we do have some old records in the back. They're not often requested, so they might be a bit dusty, but I'm sure you'll find them interesting." She led me to a small, dimly lit room at the back of the library. The walls were lined with shelves filled with old books and documents, some of them so worn and fragile that they looked as if they might crumble at the slightest touch. "These are the town's historical records," Mrs. Whitaker explained. "You'll find information about the Blackwood family in here, along with other old families from the town. Take your time, and if you need any help, just let me know." I thanked her and began to sift through the records. The documents were yellowed with age, their edges frayed, but they held a wealth of information. I found old newspaper clippings, birth and death records, and even a few personal letters written by members of the Blackwood family. As I read through the records, a pattern began to emerge. The Blackwood family had always been shrouded in mystery, their lives marked by tragedy and secrets. The more I learned, the more I realized that the shadows weren't just a recent phenomenon, they had been a part of the family's history for centuries. One of the most intriguing documents I found was a letter written by Lord Reginald Blackwood, one of the early patriarchs of the family. The letter was addressed to a friend and confidant, and it spoke of a dark force that had taken hold of the family and the manor. "My dear friend," the letter began, "I write to you in desperation, for I fear that the shadows have taken hold of my family and will not let go. They whisper to us in the night, filling our dreams with darkness and despair. I have tried to banish them, to rid the manor of their presence, but they are relentless. They demand our secrets, our souls, and I fear that they will not rest until they have consumed us all." The letter went on to describe strange occurrences at the manor, objects moving on their own, cold spots that seemed to follow the family members, and the feeling of being watched by unseen eyes. Lord Reginald spoke of consulting with a man of the occult, seeking a way to protect his family from the shadows, but his efforts seemed to have been in vain. I have sealed away the most dangerous of our secrets, hidden them deep within the manor where the shadows cannot reach them, the letter cried. The chamber was dark, the air thick with the scent of burning incense and the echoes of ancient incantations. The shadows seemed to swirl and pulse in the darkness, their presence almost tangible. In the center of the room was an altar, and on the altar was a small, ornate box. The box was made of black wood, inlaid with silver, and it seemed to glow with a dark energy. I could feel the power radiating from it, the source of the shadow's strength. "We have to destroy it," Jonathan said, his voice filled with determination. I nodded, my hands trembling as I reached for the box. The shadows seemed to scream in protest, their voices filling the chamber as I lifted the box from the altar. I could feel their anger, their desire to protect the source of their power, but I knew that we had to end this. With a deep breath, I raised the box above my head and threw it to the ground. The box shattered with a loud crack, and the room was suddenly filled with a blinding light. The shadows screamed in agony, their voices echoing through the chamber as they were torn apart by the light. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the light faded, and the chamber was silent. The shadows were gone, their presence erased from the manor. I could feel the weight lift from my shoulders, the darkness that had clung to the manor for so long finally dispelled. Jonathan and I stood there for a moment, catching our breath. The chamber was empty now, the shadows gone, and I could feel a sense of peace settle over the manor. "We did it," Jonathan said, his voice filled with relief. I nodded, my heart still pounding in my chest. The mystery of Blackwood Manor had finally been solved, the darkness that had plagued the family for centuries finally vanquished. But as I stood there in the silence, I couldn't help but feel a sense of loss. The shadows had been dangerous, yes, but they had also been a part of the manor's history, a part of the Blackwood family's legacy. As we left the manor that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that the shadows weren't truly gone. They had been vanquished, yes, but their memory would live on, a reminder of the darkness that had once haunted Blackwood Manor. The town was quiet as we made our way back, the streets deserted in the early hours of the morning. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a soft light over the town, and I felt a sense of closure as we walked. But even as I left Blackwood Manor behind, I knew that the shadows would always be a part of me. They had drawn me into their web, shown me the darkness that lay beneath the surface, and I had emerged from it changed. The secrets of Blackwood Manor were finally at rest, the shadows vanquished, but their memory would linger in the corners of my mind, a reminder of the darkness that had once been. And so, my friends, this is the end of our journey into the shadows of Blackwood Manor. The mystery has been solved, the darkness dispelled, but the memory of the shadows will remain. I hope that you've enjoyed this journey with me, and that it has helped you on your own path to mastering English. Remember to subscribe to Speak English Fluently for more stories and lessons, and until next time, keep practicing, stay curious, and don't be afraid to delve into the shadows. Sometimes, the greatest mysteries are hidden in the darkest places.